Good morning. You're listening to Highland Waves, a podcast originating from Marshbrook Studios, situated beside the world-famous Margaree River in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm Pat Wall, your host. Today, my guest is Margaree Forks born and raised Alfred LeBlanc, Senior Federal Government Executive, one-time editorial page editor of the Financial Post, Rhodes Scholar, and lifelong advanced amateur photographer. Alfred, welcome to your birthplace and to Highland Waves.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome. And we're going to start by asking you to tell us about your early life in Margaree Forks and your journey to becoming a Rhodes Scholar.
Well, thanks, sir, again for having me. I grew up just up the road in Margaree Forks, one of 8 kids born to William and Teresa. Teresa was from Saint-Joseph-de-Moine, went to school here. We made hay on the river, saw people catch fish, beautiful salmon on the river, even though there weren't a lot of salmon back when I was growing up. It were some lean years. I went to St. FX like a lot of people would have done at that time. That was kind of the automatic choice for university, and then from there, was lucky to be chosen as one of 2 Rhodes Scholars from the Maritimes in 1979. So I had a couple of years at Oxford, and then went on from there to Queen's, and then worked for Alan J for a couple of years. Alan J. McEachern, the deputy prime minister,
Cape Breton,
the deputy prime minister at the time. So as a political staffer, didn't ever really live in Margaree after leaving for university at age 18, but it's always been home. My parents' home was there till about 15 years ago, when my mother passed away and the house was sold, but it's always felt like home. It still feels like home. I'm always so thrilled to get back from Ottawa to visit and chase after photographs and go just see people and hear their stories and just be in this beautiful place.
That's great. After your MAs in politics and economics, did you consider elected office at all? I know your brother was an MLA for here for a while.
Yeah, my brother had worked. My brother Francis, he went by Frankie back then, and
Okay.
he went back to his real name Francis when he was studying in Quebec, and they couldn't pronounce Frankie. He's a bit older. He had worked for McEachern before me, Alan McEachern before me, and then he ran and for the federal nomination and won the election. So he had 2 terms as the federal MP for the riding that includes and covers this area, and he really enjoyed that. I think he was really good at it. But after 2 terms, they revisit the boundaries of ridings, and his riding was basically redrawn out of existence. So that kind of made it very difficult for him to continue as elected politician. I guess I would have considered it. It was probably in the back of my mind. I think there have been 2 vocations that have been prominent in many young people's lives that may seem a little hard to understand these days, and one was the priesthood and one was politics. Both seem a little bit hard done by these days, and I went in the seminary a bit later in life. I had worked for McEachern, traveled through Asia. After the 1984 election, went to the Conservatives, so did the backpacking tour of Asia. I would have been in my mid to late 20s, and then I came back and I went to the seminary, and I was in the seminary for 3.5 years, training to be a Roman Catholic priest. So I did that in Montreal for a year, and then switched to U of T, and was pretty close to the point where I would have to make a lifelong commitment as a deacon, and then the next year would have been ordained to be a priest. And a bit like in a relationship with a significant other, you face at some point you decide, can I really commit to this option or this person for life? And I just could not. I didn't think I could do that. So while there would have been many dimensions of that work that I would have found appealing, serving the people of this area, it's just a kind of natural. And I think a lot of the priests did an awful lot of good in this area and continue to do good. But I didn't think I was up to it. And I think in retrospect, I'm glad I chose another option. So. So I left that and went to work at various things, and then eventually ended up in the government of Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were the special advisor to Alan Jay. What was it like working for Alan Jay?
Well, he was, at the time I joined his office about 1982. Of course, he was very much the senior cabinet minister. I mean, there might have been one or other two ministers that would have maybe contended for the status that he had in the government of Pierre Trudeau, Marc Lalonde, and Jean Chrétien. But he was a very mature and savvy person, and I think those of us who worked for him learned an enormous amount, and in part just watching him interact with people, which I kind of can't help but reflect on the situation we've had with COVID and people loving working from home and thinking that's fine and I can be productive. But there are some things you pick up just watching some savvy people interact with people, engage. And I saw in some ways he was an earlier version of so many of that stock who either became priests or served in some other way, teachers, and his calling was to be a politician. And I think he just was, he really, as much as he played that senior role and liked to be a broker in Ottawa and affect policy at the national level, he really, I think his roots and his foundation and his strength came from the support and the encouragement and the love of and the challenge. He never got elected very easily. This is an interesting place because there were people on both sides with very strong commitments to their political parties, and in those old days there was a lot of respect for people on both sides of the aisle, and so I think we learned all of us who worked for him learned a lot, and we stayed friends both with each other and with him over the years. Always enjoyed popping in to see him at the lake. He was always very welcoming, and even though he's a bit of a shy man, I think, and kept he was pretty guarded with the broader public, the national public, and certainly the media. But he was a remarkable, accomplished, dedicated man. He
at the time you were with him, you were advising on fisheries. And if I remember correctly, maybe it was a little bit earlier that the 200-mile limit came into effect. Was that at the time that you were working with him, and what input did you have into that?
I did not have much on that. That was more of a national question, and a role that he would have played as I would say as a national and international level. My political advisor role was mostly involved with fisheries. I mean, it wasn't exclusively that we had no input, but mostly around the fisheries in Atlantic Canada, and questions like licensing, division of lines. We got lobbied a lot for crab licenses back then because they were looking like they were going to be worth some money, and everybody wanted in, and then couldn't understand why the Deputy Prime Minister just didn't give people licenses when they asked. I've explained to many people that and frequently the advice that that the senior civil service would give to the minister: yes, I know you want to say yes, but if you say yes to one, then you have to say no to 100, and your business is to get reelected. Ticking off 100 to please one is not a very good strategy for setting yourself up for getting reelected in 2 or 3 years' time. So he understood that.
Yeah. Back to the seminary part of your life. Was there family influence that made you make that decision to go to the seminary?
I would say no. I think my parents were somewhat pleased at that choice, but I think they were also a bit wary. They would only have wanted me to pursue that if it was right for me, and I think they sensed at some point, especially my mother, that is that really sitting comfortably with you the whole time? My perception is well, maybe this is unfair, but I think some of the Highland Scots Catholics of this coast seem to have the bug deeper than some of the Acadians, and there were just remarkable numbers of young men from those communities and that stock. Like you think of Broad Cove and how many priests came out of that area. So I think the family bug was a bit stronger and maybe because they had been persecuted as a result of it. They had taken a stand back in the 1700s and suffered in some cases as a result. But I think on the Acadian side, it wasn't. And certainly in my family, it wasn't. I didn't feel like there was any pressure or kind of. They're not like they felt like they needed one son to be a priest. The way there was a notion, and further back in history that. So there was none of that. It's just if this works for you, good, and if it doesn't, make the right decision.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Your studies in theology, how has that affected your life after?
I enjoyed the theology studies. I enjoyed there's philosophy, theology, scripture. I don't know that I see a major impact on my life, and my life of faith has had its ups and downs, and like a lot of people. It's difficult not to be upset with the church these days, and the Catholic Church and the whole Christian Church in many ways. There's a lot to answer for, and that's made it difficult to stick with it. And I'm not a regular churchgoer right now. I might go back to it. But I would say it's a bit unfortunate. There tend to be tendencies to just throw just cancel the whole thing, throw it all in the garbage. And I certainly, when I come down here, I realize, there have been problematic incidents, problematic priests, but many of the priests and other people involved in the church have done an enormous amount of good and still do an enormous amount of good, and so I think there still is important work there, but there's obviously a lot of reform and healing and repentance to do along the way.
You had a 3-year stint at the Financial Post. How did that come about?
Well, I had a good education for doing that kind of background, and the person who hired me was also intrigued by a good education, political science, economics, and having worked in a political staffing job in Ottawa. So that was pretty good background for the job that I did there, which was working on the editorial pages, so kind of the opinion pages of the Financial Post, so editing them and then writing editorials. And the person who hired me, who has had a long career for part of his life in Nova Scotia, John Godfrey, he was the editor at the time. He also thought that it was intriguing and an asset that I had studied theology. He thought that was a kind of a rounding dimension to my life, and I don't know if I ever lived up to his expectations from that point of view, but I think the package was did make sense, and it was fun. It was fun to do that, and to I must say I went there and found myself in the seat of someone who became a friend, but whose shoes were just impossible to fill, which was Andrew Coyne, who was a remarkably talented and fine gentleman, I have to say, but remarkably bright and gifted journalist, and who's a man of great integrity in the work he does in that field. And it's not been an easy field to work in, and since then, in some ways, I'm kind of glad I got out of it, because it's been a tough place to. That whole model is kind of frittering away, and not sure what's going to become of it. But it was interesting, and I made lifelong friends working there for those 3 years.
Well, that's good. Andrew Coyne is my favorite journalist at the moment. You took on several senior positions in the government, in industry, in research, environment, and you worked at the Privy Council office. In fact, you were secretary to the cabinet.
Yeah.
Can you maybe give us an overview of that life?
Sure.
Or that part of your life?
Sure. So I started, I think, as you say, and there was a research initiative, I would say, that was a bit marginal to the main part of the system. That was my first in, and that was a good spot for me to be. And then, but I got into sort of more mainstream Environment Canada in an executive role, and then industry, and then finance, and I mean there are a lot of very bad jobs in the government of Canada, I would say, but there's a lot of very interesting work that gets done, and there's different careers. Some people really like to become the top expert in a certain area, and then there really are some incredible great experts in different areas, whether it be economics or chemistry or climate change or what have you, or species at risk across the government of Canada. But many of us choose to, a big part of what is government is connecting the dots to what's going to make a difference for the people of Canada, right? And to serve the government of the day in advancing the policy agenda which they feel is best for Canada and will best position them to get re-elected. And I take considerable pride, and I think most of the civil servants that I know take pride in. I was a liberal. I was partisan for a little while, but then I very quickly became proud to serve, regardless of who the Prime Minister was. So happy to have served under Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper was a very capable and hardworking man who certainly did everything he could to advance an agenda which he thought was important for Canada, and I respect that. I did have stints in Industry Canada and in finance. I think finance was in some ways my most satisfying stint. I was responsible for the major transfers to the provinces, so equalization, Canada Health Transfer, Canada Social Transfer, territorial formula finance in the north. We were responsible for annual, twice a year meetings between the finance minister and his provincial counterparts. And finance is a highly professional, smallish department in Ottawa, where I think in general, there's a real sense of but we have an important role to play, and every year finance plays an important role. There aren't really down years for the Ministry of Finance. The annual process of producing the budget is just really important thing in the whole advancing and steadying the government of Canada and the role that the government plays. So those were great years. We had to renew the equalization program. It's a very complicated program. It's very important to PEI and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and we did that under Prime Minister Harper, who had his own particular take on federal-provincial relations. He was a minimalist in many ways. He thought the less he had to meet with the gang, the better, because they were just going to gang up on him and ask for stuff. So the fewer meetings he had to have, the better. So I think in many ways he was a wise man. But inevitably, people trying to succeed the prime minister of the day promised to really fix things on the federal-provincial relations side, and Justin Trudeau has taken a more active role, and he's had some successes and some challenges on that front. At PCO, I was responsible for federal-provincial relations, and there's a number of different areas of responsibility at PCO. So there is a secretariat that deals with social and economic policy. There's another with foreign policy and security. Federal provincial relations is another area. There's some legal stuff, and with PCO is the prime minister's department. It serves the prime minister. We provide advice to the prime minister and the prime minister's office, and we also serve the cabinet process. So we call ourselves secretaries, or assistant secretary, and we're really preparing. Policy decisions in our system need to be made, in theory at least, by cabinet or a committee of cabinet. And very important work is to ensure that, okay, this is a question that needs a policy decision. What information does cabinet need to make an informed decision that's good for Canada, and then who needs to be involved across the whole system to have had input to make sure that we have got rock solid information before the cabinet, that it's presented in a clear and compelling way, that it makes for a useful discussion, that they can really kind of come to ground very quickly to sort of say, okay, you've got three options, and we recommend option A. Option A has these advantages, these disadvantages. There's always, and then B, but the cabinet decides. The prime minister is heavily involved in deciding, but big part of PCO's role is to give advice to the prime minister and to prepare those meetings where those decisions get made. And so PCO will be involved with making sure that Environment Canada has had input, and Natural Resources Canada's input, or whichever departments have a role to play, whichever ministers need to play, their senior officials and their whole system have made sure that that they've had their say, their input. They've fed in the best analysis and their assessment of the risks, and so that's a very exciting place to be. I mean, it's very intense, from a very intense area to work, but you're really at the heart of things there. I mean, I would say at federal provincial we were slightly less at the heart of it, because we didn't run a cabinet committee the same way as some other secretariats did, but we fed into them, and yeah, that's the role that gets played, and a lot of interaction with the Prime Minister's office and his chief of staff to ensure that the Prime Minister has the information. The Prime Minister chairs the full cabinet, but also will want to play on pretty much any important policy decision. So that was very exciting, and yeah.
I'm sure it was. Just for our listeners, the PCO is the Privy Council office. And what do you feel your contribution to Canadians has been in your senior roles in government?
Well, I feel my most substantial contribution would have been at finance, when we were renewing the major transfers to the provinces. So equalization isn't important. It's in the Constitution. I think there was a view that it had been a bit derailed, too much political involvement, changing things kind of arbitrarily, maybe under previous regimes, Paul Martin, and that it needed to be put back on a more solid footing. The other strain that was happening, and that has frequently happened on those regimes, is resource revenues are very unequally distributed across the country. And so when oil and gas prices go up, it puts a lot of strain on those systems, because Alberta doesn't contribute directly to equalization, but the federal taxes the mix of taxes that the federal government uses to raise money to then redistribute money in the form of equalization would be more heavily, there would be more per capita money coming out of richer provinces, and Alberta has for most of the time has been richer. And when oil and gas revenues go up, prices go up, or potash in the case of Saskatchewan, and then how much are we equalizing of that? And it can easily feel like we're taking away those resources from those provinces to give it to poorer provinces or provinces with less fiscal capacity. So that's always tricky. It's always a kind of how much redistribution is fair. What's the basis for that? And then the Canada Health Transfer, health is a huge and growing share of provincial budgets, and federal contribution was largely through the Canada Health Act. So it posed certain conditions on what the provinces could do, and as part of that, or not directly related to that, but with the federal government's lever was the money that they were providing. But that money was declining as a proportion of the total cost of healthcare, and that created tension. So fixing them, trying to fix those systems, trying to put them back on a bit more of a, let's say, a legislated and formulaic footing, as opposed to feeling like, as opposed to regimes that seem to be subject to political influence, right? So if you push the prime minister enough, he'll change and he'll raise this. He'll just increase this. So we wanted to get that back on a more formulaic basis, so that you're not having these fights every year about more should go to Newfoundland or whatever. So I think we had some success, and I think Prime Minister Harper does deserve some credit for making that a priority and putting those regimes back on a formula that at least held up for a number of years. And then I would say, when it's hard to believe it right now, but at Intergovernmental Affairs, there was a significant or non-zero risk that there would be another PQ majority win and another attempt at a referendum. And so there was a little bit of getting ready for that possibility. That shop had played a key role in the earlier, a really key role advising the Prime Minister and organizing the energy of the whole system when there was an earlier referendum and then a risk of the country falling apart. It was a real close call in an early referendum, and then there were some difficult decisions made about whether to have the Clarity Act, provocative from the point of view of Quebec, but Jean Chrétien showed some real steely courage, I think, and those are some hard calls that he made, so that shop was very busy during that era in leading the national unity effort, and then people didn't think about it very much anymore. But we raised a bit of sense of, we better start getting ready, because they could win a majority and they could just say, this is our last kick at the can, let's go for it. And the one thing we learned from previous experience in Canada and from experience elsewhere in the world is you can't predict what's going to happen in referendum. It's just, they're very unpredictable. Brexit, David Cameron, I think, thought, oh, well, we'll have this referendum and it'll lose, and then there's, last try, and it blew up in his face, right? I don't think he wanted that to go the way it went, but like once you started down that road, Scotland had a referendum, and so one of the pieces of advice we gave the government of the UK when they came and talked to us about, well, what did you guys do to get ready? And we told them, you seem to be assuming that this is all very rational and it's all very sensible and everything. It's going to get very emotional and difficult to predict how that's going to work out. So we did a little bit of getting ready for that eventually, and although it didn't come to pass, I felt good about that that role that we had to play there in ensuring that we would be as ready as possible to face national unity risk. And for now, I think things are well, there's always challenges, and maybe the challenges are more from Western Canada right now, but it's always part of the challenge.
Yeah. You had a busy life in government, and you seem to have a busy life personally in terms of what you do. You run, row. You're a marathon runner, I think.
Well, a lot of that's in the past. I was reasonably fit. I did a lot of running and then cross country skiing and rowing, and I was reasonably fit. I'm getting old, and inevitably there's a bit of arthritis is showing up. So I'm going to have to find new ways of trying to keep fit. But it's been good, important part of my life.
Well, photography is an important part of your life too. Where did that all start?
It goes back probably to my last year in high school. I just had a camera, and I don't know why I'm drawn to that. I do kind of seem to think there's a bit of a pattern when I see couples around, and it all seems to be the guy. I don't know if there's a gender pattern in that interest, but anyway, certainly was an interest to me. So I love the scenery and love the countryside around here. So would have been chasing scenery from day one with my camera. But I'd like to just give credit to a couple of priests who got me into taking pictures of people. So Father John J. McDonald was the priest here when I was maybe 12 or 13, and we became good friends. And Dan Doucette was from here and also a friend. And they got me started very, in my early 20s. They wanted pictures of some of the parishioners in there that they were attached to, and interesting faces. And so I happily went along. I had a modest 35 millimeter film camera and went along, and I might just take you through the first one. So Dan Doucette takes me to meet Artemis Kehoe on the coast of Richmond County, in Rocky Bay, a place called Rocky Bay, and I go in this house, and it's a remarkable looking lady, and she's very happy to see the priest, and I put my camera in a tripod in the corner, and the light's tough, but with the tripod and highest ISO film, and I'm sitting there, and wow, she's a striking lady, and she's so happy to see the priest. But at early on in the conversation, she gets quite emotional. She takes up a bit of napkin or paper towel and wipes away a tear, and then she says, "Father, my doctors told me I really should quit drinking." And Father Doucette comforts her. He says, "Artemis, you're 88 years old. Why would you quit now?" And that cheered her up, and she went on to tell some great stories. But the picture that I took at the moment when she's turning sideways to kind of hide the emotion in her face, and sort of fessing up to, lots of us will know at my age the demon that alcohol is, and lots of us struggle with, we're certainly drinking, most of us are drinking more than the 2 drinks a week that we're told is the ideal thing. So that was a real moment, and it was kind of ironic. About 6 months ago, in preparing for this show, I was circling back to a couple of people I knew in the area, and someone brought in a retired, I think he's retired, Dr. Rob Martel, and he said, she was one of my patients. I'm the one who gave her that advice. And Father Doucette's advice was better.
Yeah. When did you get the idea to put this exhibition together?
I retired a couple of years ago, but I would have started working at this material earlier than that. And part of what made it interesting was that, the technology has evolved. So I've got crates of negatives, and I started going back to the crates of negatives and discovered that with digital scanning and high resolution scans, and then the editing features that exist today, that you can actually get more out of those images, considerably more than you could through the old technology in a dark room in a wet lab. So I went back and spent a fair bit of time recovering these pictures, and then trying to get a sense of, well, where is there some merit? Where is there which photos have any value or merit? And I was initially very much drawn to the scenery pictures because I do love the scenery down here, and I thought I had some very nice scenery pictures, and I would share them with friends, and people will always tell you they're wonderful, they're lovely, your stuff is. That's what's part of the challenge, is where is their real merit. But I was picking up the signals that the scenery's nice, but the people pictures are what we really like. I think part of my message at the show that it is that as nice, as beautiful as the scenery is here, I think my comparative advantage, and to some extent Cape Breton's comparative advantage for the kind of photography I want to do, is more people pictures. And why? It's because I think when people are themselves in front of the camera, and in a setting which is themselves, they haven't fixed up their whole house so it looks like everybody else's house, and they haven't dressed up, and they're not thinking about how they look in front of the camera, then they can be very, very appealing
they're in their element.
They're in their element, and they're being themselves, right? And so I find that it's not like 100%, but boy, the hit rate for that kind of experience in Cape Breton is, at least for me, is still being someone down the road. Alfred William Denny from Margaree still opens doors. I've just enjoyed that. And part of the point I made to the audience at the opening was that that's a real blessing for me as a photographer, but it's a real blessing for not just the photographer and me, but the visitor and the other visitors, to kind of just be able to pop in and be welcomed, and just get people's stories. They're not trying to impress you with how impressive they are and all that. It's just, so I think Cape Breton, there's something magic. It's not the only place with that magic in the world, but certainly Newfoundland I think of as a place, another place. But the magic is here, and it's been here for me, and I've so enjoyed, and I still enjoy going out and meeting people and just getting their stories. And if they're okay, I take a few pictures, and most of the pictures are kind of banal, but once in a while you hit on something that's kind of seems to have a bit of universal appeal and fun, and then wonderful thing is you can share them with the families for free, right? This is great.
Exactly, and I think your selection of black and white when it comes to portraiture is very appropriate, and I think hits the mark. And the other part that I liked about your exhibition is the text that you supply with the images. I think that puts everything in context and leaves it open to the viewer to understand more about the photographs, and also be in a position to ask reasonable questions after they've seen those photographs. So we're going to have to stop it for here, Alfred. But I want to thank you very much for coming in and giving us a glimpse of your career, and especially about your photographic exhibition, which is now showing at the Inverness Centre for the Arts until June 30th. I wish you every success in that endeavour, and I hope you'll enjoy your time here in your birthplace in this beautiful Margaree.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to our listeners, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you can stay up to date. And remember what Winston Churchill once said: success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So long for now, Pat.